colleague. We work very closely. He's a key advocate for the development of the entrepreneurship ecosystem, and his constant pursuit of a balanced approach between maintaining security as well as driving innovation and technology is second to none and world class. So thank you very much, Your Excellency. To those of you that live here, what I'm about to say will be very obvious. But to those of you that are visiting us from abroad, it's important to highlight something about the UAE and how it leads into my discussion on entrepreneurship. My generation was assured that the black swan event of our lifetimes would be the financial crisis of 2008. I'd love to have a discussion with the statisticians that decided that was the key event that would affect us, because COVID had other plans for us. Luckily for me, I'm based in the UAE, where our leadership addressed the COVID outbreak with a focus on one key pillar: protect the people that call the UAE home. From our social and work protocols to our world-leading vaccine program, the UAE continues to demonstrate leadership and consistency when tackling the worst global pandemic we have faced in generations. From an economic perspective, our economy, although resilient, also suffered, and so the government stepped in to help address key areas to ensure the balance between lives and livelihoods. This balanced, COVID-neutralizing, yet economic supportive focus is what helped us maintain our economy and simultaneously protect our people. But what does handling a pandemic have to do with entrepreneurship? Well, it helped us climb many global economic and entrepreneurship rankings, particularly the Global Entrepreneurship Index in 2020, where the UAE is now ranked first regionally and fourth globally. That's up from fifth in 2019. And why? Because when assessing countries' responses to the COVID outbreak as a component of this index, it was focused on one primary factor: people's safety. But it also forced change on many traditional ways of thinking and working. And this is important because it now leads to my key topic, which is building an entrepreneurial ecosystem and how we define what that entrepreneurial ecosystem is. It's essentially driven by two key elements, and His Excellency alluded to this in his speech. People, which is why I mentioned our handling of COVID, and culture. And by culture, I mean a culture of trust, resiliency, and collaboration. It must also have various features. An entrepreneurial ecosystem must be nimble and driven by the availability of information, data, and resources to help an entrepreneur thrive. It must also be diverse. In the same way that we diversify our investment portfolios, so too does an ecosystem thrive when it is diverse. Density and social capital are also core. And depending on how nascent the ecosystem is, it must have support from the public sector through financial and non-financial incentives. We must remember, though, that an entrepreneurial ecosystem is not just about the entrepreneurs. It's about the talent, resources, investors, incubators, accelerators, capital markets, regulators, policymakers, and the list goes on, that help them thrive. It's also about cybersecurity and safeguarding existing data, the use of that data, and the creation of new data that will help drive the next stage of the evolution of our economy. But where and how do you start, whether you're trying to build an entrepreneurial district, city, or country? The answer sounds simple and somewhat cliche, but this is what we did. You benchmark yourself against the best cities or countries, and then you set a very clear strategy on where you want to be 5, 10, or 20 years from now. And with that, you can then plan for the how, what, and why components. And that's an important element to remember, because the world's greatest entrepreneurial cities didn't have a roadmap. They didn't have a blueprint for how it was that they were going to progress and develop their economies. But what they did was they took decades to establish those robust and thriving ecosystems. But today, with the advent of AI, machine learning, and robust data sets, many cities have the opportunity to replicate that at a much faster pace by doing those two things. Now, what I'm very proud of in Abu Dhabi and the way that we approach this, and I think this is what helped us on the start of our journey in terms of anchoring not just the message, but the changes in policy, the changes in regulations. And that was clarity, commitment, consistency, and collaboration. The mantra was, we are in this together, and it continues to be that mantra. But let me give you an example of this. In Abu Dhabi, when we set out to build the smartest city in the MENA region, we did so by anchoring many of our policies, our funding policies, and our engagement around one key aspect: innovation. But for innovation to thrive, it must be encouraged and nurtured and given the strongest possible boost. The system and the incumbents must also be prepared for the changes that come along with that innovation, whether by necessity, design, or luck. So, in 2019, the Abu Dhabi government announced the Ghadan 21 initiative. This 3-year, 50 billion dirham initiative was launched as the anchor to spur that transformation to Abu Dhabi's economy, and was primarily focused on expanding and diversifying the economy by building it into a knowledge-based and innovation-led focused economy. One of the programs, and I'll give you an example because this is important, is the agricultural technology program that we launched. This was designed way before COVID. But what COVID did was it accelerated our adoption of that program. We launched this in 2019, and in 2020, arguably one of the most challenging periods in my life in terms of physically moving and relocating people, we were able to bring 7 global companies to be based in Abu Dhabi to deploy technology across farms, across the agricultural sector, to help drive efficiency, yield, and growth. But more importantly, what we were able to do is then take that, localize it, and apply it to other areas where water scarcity is an issue, such as water consumption in homes, buildings, offices, and schools. The other areas that we're working on today are health tech, fintech, ICT sector in general, as well as other innovation-driven sectors. No one is being left behind in the pursuit of this diversified, innovation-led economy. Today, the Abu Dhabi Investment Office, or ADIO, is proud to support these ever-expanding government initiatives to help incubate and drive innovation. As part of our 2 billion dirham innovation program, we launched various initiatives, such as the Hub 71 Demo Day, the unique Microsoft Accelerator and Highway to 100 Unicorn programs, the Plug and Play Platform Partnership, and others. We recently announced a very large partnership with Amazon Web Services, and we did that in collaboration with His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Al-Kuwaiti and his team to make sure that they're able to thrive, but also be part of the discussion and the narrative on how it is that we take our policies forward. We work with entrepreneurs and risk takers to provide them with the right support, access, and information. We engage with the private sector to help drive policy change through advocacy. Because our goal is very clear: provide the right support, whether financial or non-financial, to help companies of all sizes embrace technology, foster innovation, and thrive. And I know I'm repeating myself with some of the language that I'm using here, but it's very important because this is what drives us every single day. Now, we at ADIO are only part of the vast entrepreneurial ecosystem that Abu Dhabi has created, and this is by design. ADIO is one of the core inputs into this entrepreneurship space that has helped to create the ecosystem. But other players such as Mubadala, ADQ, G42, our partners in regulation and cybersecurity, all have been a part of the input into creating this ecosystem. And in the end, when an ecosystem is nascent, it is these inputs, particularly from the public sector and its leadership, that lead to an output that far outweighs each individual input. One final point on information security, since we're at GISEC and it's a cybersecurity conference for the most part. But we frequently talk about information security, how it is that we prevent data leaks, how it is that we support the cyber initiatives that we have as a country, and the criticality of being cautious and aware. But we also sometimes forget that information is security. Information is prosperity. It is what allows us to make better decisions, to govern better, to set the right policies, and ultimately create the right opportunity. So we must protect that information, but we must make it usable to people that are trying to grow and enhance our economy. Dr. Kuwaiti discussed multilateral cooperation. I think this is an incredibly important point, not just on a G2G basis, but also G2B, B2B, and ultimately B2C. The data that is being generated and created today is at such a pace that it's very hard to keep pace with some of the data that's generated. But we have to make sure that we design these frameworks and understand the way forward together, both within the country, within the region, and on a global level. 2020 was one of the busiest professional years of my career, although there was an element of cabin fever from being sitting at home for a while. But what we were able to do was really push the boundaries and to invest when others were retracting, to help de-risk entrepreneurs and try to build the next set of great disruptors. So the message I want you to take away today is simple. We in Abu Dhabi and the UAE want to help you thrive. We value partnerships and view the future through opportunistic lenses, with the private sector as the anchor into the future, and for the engagement with that private sector to continue to drive our policy and regulatory changes. We will help with risk-taking, we will support you, and we will watch you create the change and ultimately drive the innovation that we have designed our policies for. I'll end by repeating something that I've said a few times, and some of you may be familiar with this because I recognize a few faces here, and this is a key component of the way our leadership approaches the next phase of the UAE. Our wealth was generated from the natural resources in the ground, but our prosperity and resiliency is in the hands and minds of the people that call the UAE home. Thank you for your attention. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and please stay safe.